Joel Salatin has been asked to be an advisor to the Secretary of Agriculture. Does this mean that we're on our way to a new era in the food supply and agriculture, or is this just another popular name selling out for their piece of America's pie in government at our expense? Well, I've taken a hard look at Mr. Salatin, and I think I have a pretty good idea of where this is headed. One of our valued customers recently sent me a screenshot acknowledging Joel Salatin's acceptance of an advisor position within the USDA. This is pretty interesting given that his reference to this agency in the past has been the USDA. Her concern was if this would lead to changes that nearly every conscious consumer would like to see, or if this was just a ploy to simply give lip service to some changes in agriculture and the food supply while really just kicking the can down the road. Well, let's talk about how Joel's acceptance of this position likely plays out. But before we get into this, allow me to introduce myself. I'm Arlen Hill. I'm a regenerative rancher that helps individuals reconnect with regeneratively raised foods to improve their health in weeks, not months. Given that videos that I produce are often geared towards consumers and not the producers, just in case you're not familiar with the name Joel Salatin, Joel is the current face of regenerative agriculture in the U.S. He owns a farm over in Virginia known as Polyface Farms. But for today's video, we're going to make sure that we're going to use facts to make our determination and not Joel's status within the regenerative agriculture community. I want to set the backdrop by asking who is deciding the course of agriculture currently on a grander scale, on the big scale within the U.S. Is it currently industrial agriculture, or is it the individual farmer? And to go further down this rabbit hole, if you will, I want to go all the way back to 1977. And stick with me because you're going to see how this directly ties back to Joel. In 1977, there was a very significant debate that took place between two individuals. One by the name of Earl Butz, another one by the name of Wendell Berry. Earl Butz was the Secretary of Agriculture for the United States under the Nixon and Ford administration between 71 and 76. And he's most well known for having a statement that goes something like this: get big or get out. In fact, it became the policy. The idea with this statement was the consolidation of farmland. Either you were going to become part of a bigger corporation of farmland and farming, or you were going to get out of farming and go find something else to do. And it's very evident that with that type of mindset and policy, profits pushed activity in agriculture. Profit was the motivation center, nothing else. But unfortunately, when you ignore the other things, or when you focus on profit and you're ignoring other things, that means that you're not giving any attention towards health. You're not giving any attention towards the livelihood of the individuals that are producing the food, or even how that's affecting the community as a whole. And ultimately, it was a mindset to get rid of small farms, because think about this. If you have fewer small farms, you have fewer numbers of individuals to ultimately manipulate as a whole in the agriculture sector. That's Earl Butz. But remember, he was in a debate. So there was an opposing side here. And the opposing side was a gentleman named Wendell Berry. And while Wendell Berry was a farmer, Wendell Berry was also a writer and a poet, which means that he was a thinker. And when you look at his values were very focused on the individual. He appreciated community. He understood that rural values meant something, and that caring for the land and not just trying to milk it for all the profit that you can actually meant something. And this certainly is quite telling of the antagonism that we see currently between conventional farming and regenerative farming, two completely different mindsets. So, which side of the debate does Joel Salatin fall on is ultimately the question I want to come back to here. And I think when you look at the notion of regenerative farming right now is more of a small scale farmer mindset, more of a small scale farmer activity. It doesn't mean that there aren't large-scale operations that are implementing this. They certainly are, but these large-scale operations are not the ones that are ultimately beholden to the government. These are the guys that are acting independent. These are the guys that are probably having conversations with Joel and other like-minded individuals. And so if we think more of a small-scale farm here, and a small-scale farm shouldn't be judged on the size of land. It doesn't mean that we're only thinking about 5 acres or 20 acres or even 50-acre plots. A small-scale farm could be a 5,000-acre plot. It's really all about how that farm is ran. My point here as it relates to Joel is that when it comes to dealing with the government, this is a man that's had firsthand interaction with the government. He's dealt with the intrusive nature of the government. He's dealt with individuals inspecting his processing facility's own farm and having problems with it and having to come up with creative solutions to work around that. This is also a man who appreciates that when it comes to food, if your choice is between profit or health, any person in their right mind with any sense of a long-term view is always going to choose health over profit. Does that mean that we shouldn't have profit motivation within agriculture? Absolutely not. But it does mean that we should have a balance between health being prioritized and also making sure that the individuals, the producers, also have the ability to make a fair living as well and not be dependent on the government to accomplish that. So when you look at this notion between health and food, one thing that is not talked about enough is the relationship between industrial agriculture and industrial pharmaceuticals. This relationship is really at the crux of the healthcare crisis. And until we recognize and bring more light to that relationship, it's unlikely that that healthcare crisis is going to be undone in any timely manner. Few officials out there acknowledge that, and we need more voices that can appreciate and articulate this position. And Joel has shown the ability that he can do that quite effectively and on a consistent basis. I want to go back to Barry for a moment, Wendell Berry for a moment though, and his acknowledgement of supporting community and rural values and how this differs between what we currently see in Washington, D.C. and the individuals that are making many of the choices that are driving agriculture. These individuals are generally not from rural America. These are not the individuals that are out there getting their hands dirty still every day. Rural America is the foundation of the United States. And I will acknowledge that even over the last several years that we've been in the ranching business, as I've continued to read publications and read writings and some of Joel's writings, you can tell from his writings that this is still a man who interacts directly with his farm, who's interacting directly with other farmers. He still can get his hands dirty and be totally fine with that and appreciate the fact that he's doing it. So he appreciates the nature of that small family farm and those values that ultimately created the business and the mindset and the value that I feel like that he will ultimately bring to the Washington, D.C. landscape. He has a working man's mentality, which is quite the antithesis of what you see with these lobbyists. It's not driven by profits. It's driven by ultimately what can regenerative agriculture do for the individual that is consuming it, but also for the individual that is producing it, and how can that be a commensal and beneficial relationship? There currently is no voice for small farms in Washington, D.C., and I think he brings to the table a voice for small farms, which is vastly needed. Currently, when we look at that voice for agricultural operations, it's one-sided. And so when you look at for someone like Joel stepping into this environment and acknowledging that most of what he's going to be having conversations with are individuals in favor of large-scale agriculture, you have to be able to not try to abolish conventional agriculture or not go in with an abolitionist mindset there, but rather to go in with the idea of supporting change that can ultimately begin to trickle down. And so that ultimately leads me to the last thing that I want to say when it comes to Joel, and why I think he is a good fit for this position. He has a mindset that is ultimately going to matter. And there's two things about Joel's mindset that I think are very important to illustrate. One is that he's unapologetic. If the previous election showed us anything with President Trump, it's that he can take arrows and give them back even faster. And Salatin, well, he can do the same thing. So to use an agriculture analogy here, you need to be able to go in and ruffle feathers and not be afraid to ruffle those feathers, but also be able to kill some sacred cows in the process. He can do that. But this is also going to take a creative mindset. You're not going to find that sticking to the same conversation, trying to reinvent the same solutions in a different format is ultimately going to work for where agriculture needs to go moving forward. It's going to take some pretty unique solutions for not just Joel, but the people around him to ultimately come up to get agriculture out of the situation that it's in and back to a state where it's an appreciated profession universally, but also what the final product is that's reaching you as the consumer is ultimately the type and quality and nutritional density of product that you're looking for. I think Joel can support that. But back to the original questions for this video is, will Joel Salatin be good in the long term for regenerative agriculture as an advisor? Yes, unquestionably he will be. But for you as the consumer, the real question is, how will his contributions help you out? Well, as a farmer himself raising beef, he would advocate for local beef. But do you, as a conscious consumer, understand the benefit of buying local beef? Well, if not, take a look at the video on the screen right now.